the one, like, random little bit that I don't think we mentioned. Papachi's Moth is the chapter title, and, like, the short and sweet version is he was like a bug scientist and spent his whole life, like, studying bugs, and, like, found this moth, and he was like, oh, it's a new species, and people were like, no, it's not. And then, like, 20 years later, after he had retired, like, this young scientist that Papachi always hated that was, like, working under him was like, oh, but look at the abnormally large dorsal tufts, and it turned out to be, like, a new moth, and Papachi didn't get the credit for it. So he was, like, an incredibly bitter person, like, for all this time. And it kind of ties in, I believe it's in this chapter, correct me if I'm, like, spilling something from later, that, like, Rahel, like, on the way to the talkie, like, says something to Amu that's, like offhand and kind of, like, rude, and Amu, like, kind of, like, snaps back at her, and says that she, like loves her, like, less, like, and Rahel says, like, it feels like the moth is, like, landing on her heart and, like waving its wings slowly.
Yeah, I think that was in that chapter. Yeah. I feel like I remember, like, mother saying that she loved, her daughter.
And I can't imagine, like, your own mother saying, like, oh, like, when you do things like that, like, I love you less.
Yeah, that's not a very smart way of parenting, I don't think, at all.
All right, so now we're going to do the rhetorical analysis piece. We picked a passage from the very first chapter, the Paradise, Pickles, and Preserves. And this particular section discusses Estha and his relationship with the dog that he's picked up off the road.
All right. Once the quietness arrived, it stayed and spread in Estha. It reached out of his head and enfolded him. It rocked him to the rhythm of an ancient fetal heartbeat. It sent its stealthy, suckered tentacles inching along the insides of his skull, hoovering the knolls and dells of his memory, dislodging old sentences, whisking them off the tip of his tongue. It stripped his thoughts of the words that described them and left them paired and naked, unspeakable, numb, and to an observer, therefore, perhaps barely there. Slowly, over the years, Estha withdrew from the world. He grew accustomed to the uneasy octopus that lived inside him and squirted its inky tranquilizer on his past. When Chubchand, his beloved, blind, bald, incontinent 17-year-old mongrel decided to stage a miserable, long drawn-out death, Estha nursed him through his final ordeal, as though his own life somehow depended on it. In the last months of his life, Chubchand, who had the best of intentions, but the most unreliable of bladders, would drag himself to the top-hinged dog flap built into the bottom of the door that led out into the back garden, push his head through it, and urinate unsteadily, bright yellowly inside. Then, with the bladder empty and conscience clear, he would look up at Estha with opaque green eyes that stood in his grizzled skull like scummy pools and weave his way back to his damp cushion, leaving wet footprints on the floor. As Chubchand lay dying on his cushion, Estha could see the bedroom window reflected in his smooth purple balls, and the sky beyond, and once a bird that flew across. To Estha, steeped in the smell of old roses, blooded on memories of a broken man, the fact that something so fragile, so unbearably tender had survived, had been allowed to exist, was a miracle. A bird in flight reflected in an old dog's balls. It made him smile out loud. After Chubchand died, Estha started his walking. He walked for hours on end. Initially, he patrolled only the neighborhood, but gradually went farther and farther afield.
So this section, it introduces Essa, it introduces his quietness, and there's a lot of great imagery used talking about his quietness being an octopus that was wrapping its tentacles around him, and it really kind of helps talk about how hollow Essa is and how hollow he seems to other people, talking about the knolls and dells of his memory, dislodging old sentences, whisking them off the tip of his tongue, how he just felt so hollow inside and how it didn't really seem like that much in him. And then Chubchand, that was a relationship that Essa had, And I think that kind of shows how, even though he felt really hollow inside, he kind of drew energy from being with other people and the relationships that he had. Chubchon kind of represents the lowercase because he is a mongrel, and mongrels were often associated with the lower caste. And when the British came over to India, they brought over like Jack Russell Terriers and all their breeds of dogs, which became the pet dogs. And the mongrels native to India kind of became like the lower caste of dogs, and people would kick them on the street when they get angry, and they weren't really seen as pets. They were just kind of like the wild dogs that no one really cared about. So it's really telling that Essa, who is not lower class, would take in this dog and even care for it so much as to nurse it as it was dying. And then when this dog died, Essa just started walking. And I feel like that's also really telling about how when he loses relationships, he doesn't try to build them back up with other people, and he doesn't go to other people for help. He just like
He kind of keeps it all inside of himself.
Yeah.
it kind of like he just gets more quiet, and like his emotions just get deeper and deeper inside of him. And there was also a lot of ethos in this because of all the imagery that was used. Like it was just a really great story, and I feel like the reader can relate to it because a lot of people have had pets. There's a lot of pathos there, and there's a lot of ethos just in that, like, this is an experience that Essa had, and it's really telling about him. And we can logically assume things about his character from this paragraph.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, certainly in the way that, like you don't really know what has caused him to, like, regress into himself, but, like, the way that it's being explained is, like, you, like, understand that there, like, obviously had to be something that would cause it, and it seems, like, really logical that whatever happened would cause, like, such a deep, like, sort of, like, internal wound.
Definitely.